Pisces, my dear, lately you may feel that your life is no longer moving the way it used to. Not because everything is falling apart, but because something very subtle, very deep, is quietly shifting your inner rhythm. You may not be able to name it, but you can feel it. A vague sensation when you wake up in the morning. A moment of silence that lasts a little longer than usual. A distant gaze. One, you don't fully understand yourself. This isn't confusion. It's a signal. Pisces is the zodiac sign that lives most deeply in the world of emotion and intuition. You experience life through your skin, through your breath, through things that cannot be measured. And when an important message is approaching, you are always the first to feel it. Maybe you've been having unusually vivid dreams, so clear they linger long after you wake. Maybe you keep thinking about a person, a path, an old decision you thought was long behind you. Or maybe you keep noticing the same number, the same phrase, the same sign appearing again and again, as if life itself is trying to speak to you in its own quiet language. These signs aren't here to unsettle you. They are here to awaken something ancient within you, a part of you that has always known. There are moments in life when effort is no longer required, only listening. You don't need to rush to explain it. You don't need immediate answers. You only need to acknowledge that something is knocking, very gently, very patiently. Perhaps you've tried to dismiss this feeling. You told yourself you were overthinking, that it was just exhaustion, pressure, unstable days. But deep down, you know that isn't true. Because every time you try to turn away, the feeling returns in a different form. A conversation you overhear by chance. A song that plays at exactly the right moment. An ordinary moment that somehow reaches you more deeply than expected. Life doesn't repeat signs randomly. It repeats them when you haven't yet noticed what you're meant to see. Pisces, if your intuition feels stronger, more sensitive, more easily stirred, that isn't weakness. It's a sign you're entering a season where truth wants to surface. Not truth meant to hurt, but truth meant to release you. These unusual signals aren't here to throw you off balance. They are guiding you back to what matters most. That you deserve to live honestly with your own feelings. That you don't need to pretend everything is fine. When something inside you is already ready to change, allow yourself to slow down just a little. Listen more closely. Look more deeply at what's unfolding around you. Because when these signals appear, they always carry a message. A message that may surprise you. A message that may ask you to reconsider what you once believed was certain. And it is that very message that opens a new door where the light is softer, clearer, and more honest to the person you are becoming. And when you begin to notice that life is whispering instead of shouting, you'll understand this. Not every message arrives in noise. Some of the most important ones only appear when you are quiet enough to hear, gentle enough to feel, and brave enough not to turn away. And when you reach that state, life begins to choose its own quiet way to reach you. Not loudly, not with warning, not along the path you once imagined. Pisces often believes that if a message is truly important, it will arrive from the place you have been waiting the longest, from the person you placed your hopes in, from the door you kept knocking on, from the answer you thought would come, if you were just patient a little longer. But life has far more imagination than any plan we ever make. It doesn't follow familiar scripts. It chooses to appear. When your attention is elsewhere, when you loosen your grip on expectation, when you are no longer standing in the old place, ready to receive it the old way, this message may arrive in an ordinary moment. A conversation that seems meaningless, yet leaves you with a feeling you can't quite name. A passing piece of news that makes your heart sink, then unexpectedly lift. A small event, not big enough to shake your world, but deep enough to make you stop mid-stride. and wonder if you've been missing something all along. What's striking is this: when the message arrives, you may not recognize its value right away. It may not resemble what you once prayed for. It doesn't come shaped like a clear answer. There's no instant sense of closure, no immediate relief. It may even disappoint you slightly, because it didn't come from where you were waiting, and it doesn't speak the language you're used to hearing. But it is precisely that misalignment that explains why it had to arrive this way. Pisces, sometimes life doesn't come to fulfill our desires. Sometimes it comes to correct our perspective. This message isn't here to confirm that you were right. It's here to show you another angle, deeper, more honest. It may cause you to question a relationship you once trusted completely. It may lead you to reconsider a path you've walked for so long, only to realize you've changed more than you ever noticed. And in that moment, you may feel as if you've been pulled out of familiar waters you've been swimming in for years, without realizing how tired you had become. At first, you may want to resist this feeling. You may ask yourself why the message arrived in such a confusing way, why it wasn't clearer, softer, easier to accept. But if you allow yourself to stay with the feeling just a little longer, without judgment, without rushing to define it, you'll begin to sense something opening inside you. A new inner space. One no longer confined by old expectations. One where you are allowed to face the truth without needing to defend yourself. This message didn't come to break you. It came to break patterns that have grown too small for who you are now. It reminds you that life isn't governed only by logic and planning, but also by the living force of the unexpected. And sometimes, what doesn't match your expectations is exactly what brings you closer to your truest self. As you begin to accept that not everything meaningful comes from familiar places, your heart opens in a different way. You listen more closely. You observe more carefully. You feel more deeply what is unfolding around you. And in that openness, a new current quietly forms, carrying questions you've never asked before, emotions you've never named, and a truth waiting patiently to be seen when the moment is finally right. And then, as the pieces quietly begin to find one another, the first feeling that rises in you is not clarity, but a powerful wave moving through your inner world. It arrives faster than logic, deeper than explanation. A gentle sense of being overwhelmed, like standing before the ocean at night, knowing the water is calm, yet sensing a depth that asks you to slow down. Pisces may notice their heart beating differently in the most ordinary moments. There are times you stay silent longer than usual, times you want to be alone, without knowing exactly why. Not because you are weak, but because the message has touched a carefully guarded emotional space within you, a place you once believed would disappear if you simply avoided looking at it. But the truth is this: what remains unaddressed never disappears. It only waits for a moment safe enough to step into the light. If fear shows up, it isn't vague or imaginary. It's deeply human. The fear of changing something familiar. The fear of admitting you've given too much to a direction that no longer fits. The fear of accepting that you've grown and what once felt safe has slowly become too small. This message doesn't carry danger. It carries truth. And truth, no matter how gentle, almost always makes us hesitate at first. You may wonder if you are ready. The honest answer is perhaps not. But what matters more is this: you don't need to be ready in a perfect way. Life doesn't wait until you feel completely steady to send its most important signals. It sends them when your hands are still shaking, when you are still uncertain, when you don't yet know what your next step will be. It is within that uncertainty that you learn to trust yourself more than any plan. Pisces, this confusion is not a sign that you are lost. It is a sign that you are going deeper, deeper into yourself, deeper into questions that truly matter. You don't need to force understanding right now. Simply allow the feeling to exist, like water flowing through you, carrying away old layers of dust you no longer need to hold. You may come to realize that what frightened you was never the message itself, but the fact that deep down you have known for a long time that change was necessary, and you had never given yourself permission to say it out loud. As truth begins to take shape, even faintly, you may feel both heavy and light at once. Heavy because you cannot return to the innocence of before. Light because you no longer have to pretend that everything is fine. In this quiet space, to be gentle with yourself. There is no need to decide yet. No need to react quickly. Simply breathe a little slower. Listen to your heartbeat and recognize that this feeling of being overwhelmed is not here to lead you astray. It is here to prepare you for a new kind of clarity. A clarity where what once felt unclear begins to take form, and where an important truth is slowly revealing itself, waiting for you to be calm enough to look directly at it. And then, as your emotions begin to settle, as your breathing is no longer as rushed as it once was, something becomes quietly, unmistakably clear. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like morning light slipping through a narrow crack in the door. You can't pinpoint the exact moment it arrived. You only know that from then on, pretending not to see it is no longer possible. The truth carried by this message does not strike like a blow. It arrives as a deep, gentle touch. It reaches a place you have questioned before, but never allowed yourself to confirm. It may be about a relationship you tried to hold together with all your tenderness, even though your heart had been tired for a long time. It may be about a career path you followed out of responsibility, out of habit, out of safety, but never truly felt was yours. Or perhaps, deeper than all of that, it is the truth about your own worth, the value you have quietly lowered again and again, just to keep the peace, just to avoid disappointing others. This truth does not arrive to accuse you. It comes with a strange calm, as if it has been waiting a very long time to be seen clearly. At first, you may feel a slight ache in your chest, not because it is wrong, but because it is right. So right that you realize you have known it for a long time, only never had the courage to name it. Some truths do not hurt because of what they are, but because they force us to look back at the road we have traveled, at the moments we stayed silent when we should have spoken, at the times we remained in places that no longer fit, simply to avoid disturbing the surface. Pisces, if your heart feels heavy right now, remember this: that heaviness is not a sign of loss. It is a sign of awakening. You are not losing anything. You are reclaiming an honest view of your own life. And that honesty, though it may feel sobering at first, will become a powerful source of strength. This truth does not demand immediate action. It asks only one thing: that you do not turn away anymore. Do not keep convincing yourself that everything is fine when something inside you has already changed. Do not continue carrying what no longer belongs to you just because you fear disrupting outward peace. There is another kind of peace, deeper, more lasting, one that only arrives when you dare to live in alignment with what you truly feel. As the light of truth spreads, you begin to see things with new clarity. Small actions from others take on different meaning. Recurring emotions no longer feel random. You realize you have grown tremendously, while the world around you has not yet adjusted to who you are becoming. And that is no one's fault. It is simply a sign that you are moving forward. You may need quiet time alone to process what you have seen. Allow that. In that quiet, you are not weak. You are reconnecting with yourself, learning to ask questions, not to judge, but to understand. To understand what you want, what you need, and what no longer needs to be carried forward. As you begin to accept this truth as a natural part of your journey, a subtle shift takes place. The weight does not vanish immediately, but it grows lighter because you are no longer fighting it. Your heart, still sensitive, creates more room to breathe. And within that space, something new begins to form. Not fear, not confusion, but the awareness that some doors only open when you are honest enough with yourself. This revealed truth is not the end of the story. It is the moment you stand at a crossroads, the old path still visible, but another direction, now illuminated by new light. And as you stand still long enough to feel your heartbeat, align with the breath of life itself, you realize that nothing has been taken from you. Everything that has unfolded has been preparing you for a season where you no longer have to live in uncertainty. And when the truth has finally been faced, even without being spoken out loud, you begin to feel a movement inside you. Very slow, but unmistakably real. It doesn't sound like a dramatic ending. It feels more like the tide quietly pulling back. After a long season of rising, you realize that some things have stayed long enough, fulfilled their purpose, and no longer need to be held onto. Pisces is rarely good at endings. You tend to stay a little longer, hope one more time, wait for one more sign, because you believe that love, patience, and compassion can eventually make everything better. But some chapters in life don't end because love was missing. They end because they have already taught you everything they were meant to teach. When this message appears, you begin to understand that not every goodbye is a loss. Some endings are the most gentle form of self-respect. You may look back and recognize hopes that were once beautiful, but placed in the wrong space. You believed in potential more than reality. You waited for change to come from the outside, while inside, you had already changed long ago. You held on to an old belief because it once made you feel safe, even though it no longer reflected the person you are becoming. Realizing this may tighten your chest for a moment, but right after that, a very real sense of relief follows. This cycle does not close in anger. It does not end in blame. It ends in understanding. You no longer need to prove anything, no longer need to strive for validation, no longer need to explain why you are tired. You simply understand that some paths are only meant to be walked together for a certain distance, and letting go does not erase what once existed. It places it gently where it belongs, in memory, where it can finally rest. Pisces, when an old cycle closes, you may feel empty. Not because you lack something, but because you are creating the space that something new requires. That space can feel unfamiliar, like walking into a room that has just been cleared. No furniture, no sound, no distraction. Yet it is precisely in that quiet that you begin to hear yourself clearly again. What you need, what you want, and what you no longer wish to repeat. You may notice that you have less patience for vague promises, less desire to live in endless waiting, less willingness to place your worth in someone else's hands. This does not make you cold. It makes you grown. You learn the difference between hope and illusion, between compassion and self-sacrifice that goes too far. And that, even when it happens quietly, is a profound step forward. When you allow an old cycle to close, you also give yourself permission to stop blaming yourself for past choices. You understand that you did the best you could with the awareness and emotions you had at the time. There is nothing to regret, nothing to fix, only the recognition that you have already moved beyond that place, and carrying what no longer fits would only weigh down the road ahead. There is a deeply peaceful moment when this truth settles in, not joy, not excitement, but the feeling of standing firmly on your own ground. You are no longer caught between two worlds, no longer torn between staying and leaving. You are fully where you are, with a clearer understanding of yourself and a quiet trust that life knows how to guide you to the next season. Once you are ready to release the old one, and when this cycle closes completely within you, something else begins to take shape. Not a clear answer, but a gentle forward pull, as if a door has closed behind you, not to trap you, but to keep you from turning back, giving you just enough freedom to sense that a deep transformation is waiting ahead. And once you've accepted, letting go of what has already fulfilled its purpose, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. You realize you can no longer return to the way you used to live, whether you want to or not. Not because you're being forced, but because you have changed. This message doesn't arrive to ask for your permission to change. It arrives as a quiet, undeniable truth, steady and firm, that the person you are today no longer fits the choices you made yesterday. Pisces tends to change slowly, not because you lack courage, but because you are always trying to keep the world around you from being hurt. You're used to placing other people's feelings first, used to adapting, used to stepping aside. But there comes a moment in life when that constant yielding begins to drain your vital energy, and this message appears right when you've grown tired enough to no longer look away. The change you're being called into is not dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a sudden turn. It begins quietly, in small moments, in the way you look at a familiar situation and no longer accept it as you once did, in the way you stop saying yes automatically when something inside you is resisting, in the way you begin listening to discomfort instead of silencing it with logic. Each small shift is like recalibrating your inner compass, little by little, until a new direction starts to feel clear. You may feel disoriented during this time, when old standards no longer hold, and what's new isn't yet familiar enough to rely on. But it is in that empty space that growth takes place. You learn that you don't need immediate answers. You learn to stay with the question, without panic. And most importantly, you learn to treat yourself with the same respect you once reserved for everyone else. This message asks you to look closely at how you choose, not just the paths you take, but the way you live each day. You begin to see that pleasing everyone is no longer the measure of a good heart. That sacrifice only has meaning when it doesn't cost you yourself, and that sometimes saying no is how you say yes to your real life. Pisces, this change may feel lonely at times. When you stop playing familiar roles, not everyone understands what you're doing. There may be confused looks, unspoken questions, even silence from people who were once close. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It simply means you're stepping out of old patterns, and every true shift needs time to be seen. Deep within, a new energy begins to move. Not loud, not explosive, but steady, grounded, and resilient. You no longer have to force yourself to be strong. You become strong because you stop betraying your own feelings. You begin to believe that your worth is not measured by how much you can endure, but by how honestly you live. The maturity this message brings is not hardness. It is softness with boundaries. You still love. You still feel deeply, but you no longer allow yourself to be swept away. You know when to stay, when to leave, and when to pause and listen inward. Each choice now carries weight, not because it's difficult, but because it's true. And as you grow familiar with this new version of yourself, you realize something important. This change has taken nothing from you. It has simply returned to you the right to live fully as who you are becoming. Within that steadiness, a subtle feeling begins to form. Not total certainty, but a quiet trust that when you are brave enough to change from the inside, life begins to open doors you once believed were beyond your reach. And then, when the inner changes no longer alarm you, when your heart has adjusted to its own new rhythm, something very different begins to appear. Not like a gift neatly wrapped, but like a stretch of open sky, wide enough for you to finally see what fear and habit once kept hidden. You begin to realize that what surprises you most is not that the message arrived, but that quiet doors started opening. Right after Pisces, opportunity rarely arrives in bright colors. Most of the time, it comes humbly, almost unnoticed at first. A new thought that flashes and is quickly dismissed. An offer that seems unrelated. A turn you never considered because it didn't resemble the road you were used to walking. But once your perspective shifts, those small things suddenly carry a different weight. You no longer view them with suspicion, but with the seasoned curiosity of someone who has lived through enough cycles to understand that safety does not always mean truth. You may begin to feel freer in the way you think. You allow yourself to imagine a life no longer bound to obligations that drain you. You allow yourself to consider work that doesn't just sustain you, but nourishes your soul. Or more simply, you allow yourself to step away from connections that no longer bring peace, even if they once mattered deeply. This release is not loud, but it is real, like setting down a heavy bag you've been carrying for far too long. Pisces often doesn't realize how strong they truly are until they stop holding everything together. And in that softened state, you see more clearly the decisions waiting to be made, not rushed decisions, not impulsive moves, but choices that arrive at exactly the right time. You begin to feel the rhythm of life instead of trying to control it. You know when to move forward, when to wait a little longer, and when to take a different turn that once felt too disruptive to consider. Some opportunities only appear when you stop trying to prove your worth. When you no longer chase validation, life begins to respond with clarity. An invitation may appear, a meeting, a chance to collaborate from a place you never expected. But what matters most is not the form that opportunity takes. It's how it feels inside you. When you face it, no tension, no forcing, just a quiet agreement between heart and mind. You may also realize that the greatest opportunity doesn't come from the outside at all. It comes from within. The ability to voice your needs without guilt. The ability to set boundaries without fearing the loss of connection. The ability to believe you deserve more than you once allowed yourself to receive. These shifts are subtle, hard to point to, but they form the foundation for every lasting step ahead. As you begin living with this new clarity, life feels more cooperative. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you stop resisting what is unfolding. You learn to move with the current instead of being pulled by it, and within that harmony, a quiet trust takes shape that you are exactly where you need to be, even if the full path ahead has not yet revealed itself. The surprise that led you here did not arrive to test you again. It came to open a possibility you once never allowed yourself to imagine. And as you stand in this new inner space with a lighter heart and clearer sight, you begin to understand that what comes next does not require urgency. As long as you continue forward with this honesty, life will gradually reveal what is deep enough, bright enough, and meaningful enough to show you that you were right to listen. And when everything has finally settled, when the movement of the outside world no longer consumes your attention, a familiar voice begins to rise, clearer than ever before. Not a loud voice, not a command or a warning, but a deeply personal feeling, soft, intimate, one that has always been there, now finally heard in full. Your intuition doesn't arrive like a sudden miracle. It returns like an old friend, patient, waiting for you to become still enough to recognize it. Pisces is born with a rare depth of perception. You sense what others leave unsaid. You feel the atmosphere of a room, the sadness behind a smile, the truth hidden beneath a promise. But there were times you doubted yourself. You wondered if you were too sensitive, too imaginative, too trusting of things that couldn't be proven. So you learned to set intuition aside. You made room for logic, for other people's expectations, for outside standards. This message doesn't arrive to blame you for that. It comes to remind you that the deepest part of you never went anywhere. It simply stayed quiet, observing, waiting for you to return. When you begin to trust your inner knowing again, you don't need to force yourself to become someone new. You only need to remember how you once knew, how you once felt, how you once chose, before the world told you it wasn't practical. Intuition doesn't promise an easy road. It promises something more honest, that each step will be real. When you stand before a decision, you no longer measure it only by right and wrong on paper. You listen to what your chest tells you, heavy or light, closing or opening, draining or restoring. These small signals, when respected, can take you farther than any perfect plan ever could. You may notice that when you trust your intuition, things don't need to be clear all at once. The path ahead doesn't appear like a detailed map. It shows up as just enough light to take the next step. And each time you move forward with that honesty, the light moves with you. Not early, not late, but right on time. Pisces, this world needs people who know how to listen, not only to others, but to themselves. When you live in alignment with your intuition, you become a quiet anchor for those around you. You don't need to fix anyone. Simply by being real, you create a sense of safety. You remind others that gentleness is not weakness, that emotion is not something to control, but something to understand. There may be moments when doubt returns, moments when the old way feels tempting, simpler, more familiar. When that happens, remember this feeling, the feeling of no longer fighting the current, the feeling of not having to explain who you are, the feeling of knowing that your path does not need to resemble anyone else's to be meaningful. The final message does not ask you to be perfect. It simply invites you to be honest. Honest with your feelings, with your limits, with your deepest desires. When you live that truth, you begin to see that life doesn't need to shout directions. It whispers very softly, through your intuition, through small daily choices, through a growing sense of peace, taking root in your heart. And in that trust, you move forward without rushing. You stop searching for answers everywhere else. You carry them within you. The road ahead, even if it can't yet be named, begins to feel strangely familiar, as if you aren't traveling somewhere new at all, but slowly returning to yourself, to the place where everything you needed to know has always been waiting patiently for you to trust it enough to listen.